insight into what's going on?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, look, you can get caught up around the particular threat vectors themselves and the modus operandi, but it's the same shit in a different way is the way to put it down. It's the same stuff. It's just being done in a different way now all the time. They're innovating, they're using new technologies and new ways of doing it, but it's the same stuff. If I was here 10 years ago saying this, we'd be talking about the same kind of threats and everything else like that. So it's a cat and mouse game, and we need to innovate, we need to have agility, we need to have capability, we need to network. I mean, even when my own organization, the ICTTF, and we came together, it was Ninyarka Kurila Kayla, in unity there's strength. Because the bad guys work together, they share, they collaborate, and they share intelligence, information, tools, what's good, what's bad, everything else like that. That's why they're a $10.5 trillion economy today. So the good guys, we have to do the same thing. We have to come to conferences like this. That's why they're so important. We have to share, we have to learn, and we have to be able to teach each other and help each other as the good guys in that kind of ecosystem. And you know, that's why I commend Michael and his team for putting this kind of an event on, because it does glue people together, it does galvanize people. As cynical as Michael is, if you ever talk to him, but he is doing a lot of good, like with these kind of events as well, because it's so important that we keep up to date with what is going on out there. But don't get caught up around in the latest APT number or the latest whatever, around a vulnerability code or something like that. It's the same stuff in a new way. They're just regurgitating, innovating, and doing the same kind of thing. That's what I'm experiencing. If I could add one point on that, Charlie, sorry, I don't mean to hog anything, but it's just one point of that, is what is different is the law. Right? What was acceptable even a year ago is now against the law. And by that I mean how honest, legitimate businesses are running and operating. And I say that and then I'm going to refer to banks. But anyway, how, say for example, the financial sector or anybody that falls underneath to how you're operating, there are now laws in place to say that you have to have digital resilience in place. You have to be able to prove you have those things in place. You have to train your people. You have to secure the data and so on. I met a company earlier on, Feather Lake and so on. What they're doing is required by law. But not a lot of people even understand that, like, you know, from that perspective. So the laws have changed, the accountability has changed, governance and oversight has changed. That's the big catalyst, and that's the big change. It's not about pointing about who's in charge of IT or who's in charge of cybersecurity or anything like that. Whoever runs the business, they're on the hook. That's the big change.
And Richard, I'm wondering with you, I mean, you know, Paul makes a great point, which is, you know, a lot of these threats, you know, the look of them might change, but, you know, it's still the same stuff that we've seen for a long time. I mean, and I'm thinking of AI in particular, you know, some people are like, oh my God, AI's here, you know, but obviously it's been around for a long, long time, way before ChatGPT and so on. Yeah. You know, it was a threat then. I mean, you know, has it kind of increased significantly in the time since then, or is it, as Paul says, the same old thing?
I had the same conversation with someone from coming up to the stand where I was like, it is the same old thing. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of security threats. AI is very popular as a talking point. It is obviously a threat. But when you see incidents, you know, they're almost old. It's like permission problems, bad passwords, outdated devices. So like, those are still going to be the issues. With AI, it's kind of a bit like when we had malware, it's gone to ransomware. It's very prevalent. Ransom Hub is great as a service for attackers. For defenders, it's a bit harder. I mean, it's the same thing with AI. Like a few years ago, we used to have, you know, the fraudulent messages and stuff like that. They'd build it off human heuristics. They'd look at your phone number. They'd tie it back to data breaches. AI is just another kind of extension of that, of allowing them to create believable personas to try trick users and businesses into doing something, you know, giving a password up, running malware, something like that. It's just another extension. We're always having this evolution, these very similar conversations every year, and we're going to have to counter them. Hopefully, I suppose to your point, maybe AI will help us in some of these regards. But yeah, they're kind of similar issues that we keep seeing.
Yeah, and I'm wanting to just on that, Michael?
Yeah, just on that, I mean, this is our 8th Cyber Expo Ireland event, and it has evolved from everything has changed, if you like. The messages have changed, and I guess, you know, I love what Paul says. If you've ever talked to Michael, like it's a cynical exercise. Like, it's scary to talk to me. I'm a really nice guy, to be honest with you. Well, that's what my mother said anyway.
Yeah, everyone knows you. That's not true, Michael.
But thank you. But But the thing is, it is evolving. Cyber is evolving. The threats are evolving. They may actually be very similar, but they're just evolving into new platforms, new areas, and whatever it is. If you look at the way people operate, the way people work, the human risk factor, everything else. A lot of what's out there is a confidence trick, just in a different type of technology, different vector. It's not like computers are risk. It's just they happen to be the vector that we're using. It's not like technology is the risk. It just happens to be whatever that everything is based on that at the moment. But what we are definitely seeing is, and to Paul's point there about DORA and NIS2 and the various regulations and governance, we're seeing these things have to be done now. And why do they have to be done? Why is there regulation? Why is there governance? Because you know what? People didn't do them. What would he do? We all see the M&S stuff. Everybody's commentating on the M&S stuff, but there's going to be a big fine out of the back of that. Somebody has screwed up big time. And I talked to some organizations here, and we talk to organizations all of the time. They still have these vulnerabilities and issues out there. So to Richard's point there, a lot of the stuff is the same old. People just need to do the right things. But there are technologies out there to assist. We have seen it. I'm a bit cynical, as a few people would suggest. I see marketing AI. There's AI in everything. I'm waiting for an AI coffee. But there's marketing AI. There's AI then which is a threat. Then there's AI which is a benefit. And there's AI which is being used in businesses like ChatGPT, and how you actually manage that, because that's key to enable your business to be productive going forward. So how do you manage those sort of things? So we're trying to bring those things together. I know there's a general way to saying it's all evolving. And for next year, I would say we're going to see, I don't know where the marketing people go in this course. We know where the ransomware guys and all that stuff go, but where do the marketing people go and think of the next buzzword? But ultimately, it is an evolution.
Yeah, can I add to that? Because the point you make is a strong one, Michael. I mean, this whole thing of AI. AI is another weapon we can use to defend ourselves, but it's also a weapon that can misfire. And if we depend on it too much and just think because something is AI, we're safe. I talked this morning about self-healing networks. I talked about all these different kind of things and what's real, what's not real, the overpromise. Stand back and think of it not as AI, but as IA, intelligence augmentation. How can you leverage these tools to make things better, faster, easier, and all of those kind of things? Don't just think it's an AI thing and you hand it over and you hand over your business model. Certainly the deployment or use of AI is going to be based on good governance and good policy, good culture in an organization. And they're the three keys you need to do to be able to empower and use and enable AI in an organization. And with those regulations like DORA, the UK Operations Resilience Framework in since 31st of March, and you've got NIS2 directive and all of those kind of things, but they are all putting it on the owners of the businesses and the management board of those businesses. You're legally responsible for this. You're legally responsible. And it was the Trustee Savings Bank, the guy got fined £81,000 because when he went to do an upgrade, it failed. The CIO got fined £81,000, not the Trustee Savings Bank. They got fined $300 million. They lost 80,000 customers. They went from a profit-making bank to a loss-making bank over one instant. It was not a hack. It was not the cyber bad guys. It was not anything like that. It was somebody not being operationally resilient from a digital perspective. And that's why we have DORA. That's why we have NIS2. That's why the UK Operational Resilience Framework. That's why you need to talk to all those vendors as well.
A good question following on from that, Paul, is, as you say, the regulations are there now. Are businesses paying attention to it? Because at least in the run-up to NISC and to DORA, I was getting inundated, as a journalist, I was getting inundated with these surveys kind of going, businesses aren't ready, it's coming down the road. It was daily, you're getting these emails coming in. Was that true? Is that true now?
I don't mind answering that, or do you want?
Do you want to take that?
No, well, I suppose from my experience, so we would assess organisations against the regulations and see how prepared they are. And in a lot of cases, the organisations, particularly maybe some of the IT industries, are not prepared and not understanding, am I in scope of NIS2? So it's a journey for them. And again, a lot of organisations will turn around and say, well, we have ISO 27001, so therefore we must be compliant. But it's actually going back and look at the scope of your certification. Does it actually cover the whole organisation? And, like what Paul just said, accountability is vital, and having a risk management process. So I think some better than others. Maybe in the financial services industries, they're a little bit more prepared. They've dealt with, specific audits since, for the last couple of years already. But there still is a lot of work to do. And what I would say about these regulations with DORA and NIS2, it's nothing that I wouldn't recommend to any client I have, no matter what industry you're in. These are the basics. And I think that's a point that's been, discussed here on this panel already. We're talking about like future threats and so forth. The basics still aren't being done in a lot of organizations. And if you get the basics right, it will, progress your security and so forth, and you will be able to manage regulations, deal with them effectively, but also protect your organization, protect your employees, protect your individuals. Somebody once said to me before, cybersecurity is not hard, just don't tell anybody, But it is that way, is getting the basics right. And unfortunately what we see is a lot of time, people just don't have the time. So that's where, they tend to rely on third parties as well, and that leads to other risks as well.
And is time the critical factor here? Because I'm wondering, because Paul, you started off by saying, the basic rules have not changed in many ways. What was needed before is still what's needed. What are the what are the things that companies have to proactively do, and what's stopping them from doing it? Because you're having to continually repeat the message and educate people again and again on this.
So if we were sitting here pre-COVID, we'd be talking about the fact of, the tail doesn't wag the dog, the management, the leadership has to deal with this. And it's a mantra I've been going on for over 10 years about leadership is the answer, leadership is the answer, leadership is the answer, because that's what it requires. And now with these laws, these are making leaders accountable within the organization. That's a big change. The other big change along the lines of this, and it is a journey, but the other big change is cybersecurity is no longer good enough. Cybersecurity is defensive, it's reactive. This is about being strategic and proactive and expecting things. So beforehand, when we used to just keep the data behind a castle wall, it was about keeping those castle walls up, nobody got access to the data. As we sit here, there's data flying over our heads and everything else like that. So guess what's going to happen? Things will go wrong. Sometimes it'll be hackers, sometimes it'll be nation states, but guess what? Sometimes just fat fingers, just people will make mistakes. That's what happens. Or people forget to follow a process or a policy or whatever it happens to be. So those things will make, and what they want to know is the imperative for leadership. Are you digital, operationally resilient? Are you ready? Can you deal with it? Can you detect when something happens? Can you respond? Can you recover? But most important, can you prove you are? The fines aren't for not being resilient in many cases. They're for not being able to prove you're resilient. That's the big piece. And the fines are only one piece of what people are afraid of. There's personal accountability. There's professionals basically shitting a brick that they won't be able to work in the industry again, because under NIS2, under DORA, and everything else like that, they're going, wow, if I'm in charge, when something goes wrong, I may never work in this industry again because I can be blocked off, I can be stopped. And that's the same for the UK regulation, the NIS2, and for DORA. So personal accountability the whole way through. We talked about the journey piece on securing these regulations. Everybody wants the easy way out. We're ISO compliant, we're grand. No, you're not. If you've identified your critical important business functions in the financial sector and they're on the table, then everything around that's going to be scrutinized. Now, for anybody who's gone through the pain of this, there's all these deadlines. DORA's coming for 2 years. Then DORA was here January 17th. Then the Registers of Information have to be going in. They've gone to the competent authorities. They've gone to the ESAs. The ESAs are going to come back in July. The ICT, critical third-party providers, will be identified. And then guess what happens? The supervisory audits happen in Q3, Q4 of this year. This has only begun. So yeah, there's been a drop-off, I'd say, Charlie. It's a good observation around January. People are going, oh, God, that's over. We got the DORA thing, we're out of the way. It's only begun. And it really hit home in Q3, Q4, and all of a sudden providers are going to lose those contracts that they thought were safe renewals. You're not going to get them. You're not going to get them unless you can prove you're compliant with DORA. Because the people that sign those off are not going to risk losing their jobs, getting banned, all the rest, not being able to work in the industry or the business and so on like that, because they're accountable for your shit, basically, at the end of the day, right? So that's how important it is. It's a game changer, guys. Absolute game changer in the industry.
Sorry, my voice isn't as loud as Paul's. Sorry about that. I live on the south side. I live on the south side. But to that point, regulations, they shouldn't be, we all know they should not be the driver, but why are they there? Because people didn't do what they're supposed to do. But the other thing that we're seeing, so we're talking about fines and we're talking about all the sort of liabilities and the accountability, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing we're absolutely seeing is third-party risk and people looking at the environment in which they operate and all of the supply chain to them and the fact that they may be in the supply chain. And that's where you're going to lose. That's where somebody's going to say, do you know what? You're a key supplier to us, but because you are not as as protected and as prepared and everything else. And it's not just about defenses, it's about the ability to recover and the ability to actually have an incident response. But you don't have those things in place. Because you don't have those things in place, we're not somebody who is willing to give you a contract which is key to your survival going forward. So now you're at risk as a purely commercially. And organizations, larger organizations particularly, are risk assessing and looking at third-party risk management and looking at all the profile of their key suppliers. So they're saying, listen, if I have one key supplier here and they have a vulnerability, they have a risk, they have something which is not properly addressed, that actually is a risk for me, so I'm not going to carry that. So the pressure is going to come from everywhere. It's not just it's not just governance and compliance. It's going to be commercial. And you know what? 300 million fine. That's a career limiting move for somebody. At the end of the day, the 80 grand one is neither here nor there. It's the impact on them. Ultimately, there will be key people losing their jobs. But when you start losing key contracts, you start losing key relationships because you haven't done the right things. That's when it's really, really impacting. That's
a really good point. I interviewed someone from the Chief Information Officer of JP Morgan recently, and they were referring to a warning that basically the CISO sent out just ahead of the RSA conference, where he was saying, of JP Morgan, where he was saying they have a 17 billion annual budget just for tech. And he was warning about the risk, particularly from SaaS providers, saying, they are a real weak link at this and something has to be done. There's such an over-reliance on SaaS. Now everyone's switched towards it, and there's a real danger here in terms of, they're the weak link. I'm wondering, Richard, have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, post-COVID, everyone has pretty much went to SaaS or the cloud to some shape or form. So I mean, everyone is suffering about, I suppose, either shadow IT, the business going off and purchasing stuff without IT's awareness, not going through like proper governance, data protection, any kind of assessment about where they are, or even just proper record keeping about who their third parties are, to Michael and Paul's points about the whole governance of that. So they'll all slip through the cracks. So I suppose we're seeing people who are looking for stuff who'll figure out like shadow IT, doing external asset discoveries, figuring out where their data is, the CASB style solutions to finding out what your employees are actually up to, what they're using, consuming, and then where the data ends up. So it's proving quite a problematic point from security and data protection on both sides of those areas. And again, it impacts GDPR because at some point down the line, there's so many SaaS providers that inevitably one of them is going to get breached. I mean, the classic example recently is probably the Oracle one. A lot of people probably didn't even know they were consumers of it, and yet they're in.
And Oracle kept very quiet on it, or
well,
as best they could.
Oracle's incident response to that was potentially not the best. Yeah. But again, you have clients finding out that they're in this, and it could potentially have been like 10 years ago or more that they registered for this kind of setup, and they, again, won't know what data's in there until they go looking. So there's a lot of challenges around figuring out what you have and then keeping proper track of it. So it's all going to lead into, hopefully, like NIS2 and just proper supply chain management. But again, back to that earlier point of none of this is hard to do. It's what we should be doing. It's just best practice. Why aren't we doing it?
Just staying on the legislation bit for a moment, one thing I'm really interested in is, particularly with, say, the EU AI Act and with GDPR, there was a lot of conversation around this is really good for companies that embrace the legislation early on because it gives them an advantage of they're ready to go, they're ready to roll, they're ready to adapt. Is the same thing happening in terms of, I suppose, cybersecurity legislation? I mean, is that of benefit to companies that embrace it and kind of make it part of their modus operandi early on?
I would say yes, because if you bake it in, it's going to be cheaper and it's going to be better than trying to ice a cake with it afterwards and not know what's in there, and that's it. Putting the safeguard right at the end and going, we need to check this for cybersecurity or legislative regulation and all that kind of stuff. Takes longer, more resistance, not as effective, blah, blah, blah. Bake it in. So that starts with the leadership getting trained and the education. So they understand, well, I want to design a cool marketing tool, I want to do a banking app or whatever. But what are the regulations? They need to at least understand them from a broad brushstroke level. Getting to the vendor side of this, I would say know your customer, right? So all your customers who are in this sector, whether they are financial sector or supplying that sector or the critical entities and so on, they all require of you confidence and assurance that you are doing what you say you do from the point of view of cybersecurity and resilience. I gave 5 trust markers this morning out about AI and all the rest that vendors should be talking about to get out there. Make it easier for your people to understand you. So instead of losing business, you're in a stronger position to win business because they want to see those things. They want to see that you have statements around DORA, that you have statements around NIS2, that you have this evidence, that you have independent inspection and all those kind of things. And they want to see that because that makes it easier for them. They're taking on the risk by dealing with you. And assurance will give them confidence. And assurance is evidence of what you say you do and proving you do what you say you do. So being able to articulate in the industry and so on. It's very, very important. I think it's a game changer for smaller, innovative companies, which are the solution to most of the problems we have around regulations, by the way. The big guys aren't going to come up with the answers. Small, innovative ones. And they can thrive in this environment. Thrive.
Yeah, I think it's vital for organizations to have it built in, security by design and so forth. Particularly what I come across when I'm talking to clients, it's their reputation. So you can explain to the board a return on investment at a high level for cybersecurity, but you can definitely explain to them the impact of a breach and what that can do for them. And they see it among their competitors in a lot of cases as well. So that's the strong motivation, really, is reputation. And, particularly sensitive clients, we'd have some financial services and so forth, and just even for people to be in the building is confidential. So, it's really, really sensitive information, and all of that is vital to them. So that's their reputation, and they understand it and they take it seriously. And also, what's really, really important is what Paul and what Michael, what we've been saying, is that governance piece. So sitting down with the leaders of the business, explaining the risks to them, and getting them to understand it. I think where a lot of security professionals in the past, where I think we failed, is that, connecting with the business. And we used to blame the users, and still I think it's 74% of incidents occurred as a human involved and so forth. But, we need to work with the business. And it's that security awareness training piece and building that in as well.
Just on that, firstly, I love the stats. I often wonder where they all come from, but I love them anyway. But there are marketing people associated with all the companies that come up with these stats. So I'm sure they're perfectly adequate. But no, but just on a point, I think when you get to competitive environments, and we're all in competitive environments at this stage, all of your organisations are as well. If you lead with cyber as a message, and the fact that you're compliant, and the fact that you are actually in a position to give a continuity of supply of service or technology or whatever it is, or product, whatever it may be, if you lead with that, you actually are opening the opportunity for the person who's buying to actually compare. So you're putting yourself out there as a positive comparison. So, this is where I think as the market becomes more and more mature, being cyber secure and compliant and being whatever we like to use for prepared for all of these things, prepared for an incident, prepared for an event, prepared for recovery for that, they will become more and more competitive and compelling reasons to do business with you. So to lead with that always, if you want to lead and you want to be competitive in an environment, commercially or financially or whatever it is, you need to lead with competitive advantage. So I would absolutely see this as becoming a key thing going forward.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Michael. Richard, I wanted to ask you about, one thing I'm kind of interested in is that everyone's been talking about sort of buy-in from senior executives. Has that changed over the years? Because, back in the day, it used to be very much kind of like, the CEO would kind of go, oh my God, the tech guy is talking gobbledygook to me, make him go away. Has that changed now? I mean, is it, because
you're
they have
talking
to, but
the techie one is going to talk
exactly.
gobbledygook.
So you well know this. I mean,
Yeah.
do you still have those conversations where your boss kind of go, boss?
I think definitely the conversations have gotten easier because even if years ago, the CISO almost wasn't even a role, it was just IT. And even IT could be underneath the CFO. Yeah. So there was all this kind of oddities that you could come across. We're now, you actually have a CISO, you can have these conversations. They're on a board, so they have equal representation of, you're a critical factor in the business. So it's taken quite seriously now. So the conversations have changed. Again, you also do get more time with board level and the business to explain the rationale. It helps because you can bring them on the journey of why you're trying to do something. It also helps you understand, well, what's their business objective? Why do they want to do these what sometimes seems like from an IT or security perspective, mad things that they come up with. But there's logic to it. Like they want to make money, they want to engage with clients. Well, it could be anything. But you can at least bring them on a journey, especially again, like going back to the legislation. You can explain the reasons of why you're doing business impact assessments, why you're trying to figure out BCP scenarios, why you have to do supply chain management. It's all these things that help us as security people explain to the business about why we do these things. And so those conversations are really helping bring the entire business on a journey to understand why we do what we do.
That makes sense. You wanted to jump in there, Kevin?
No, just that I used to often consider myself like Chicken Little in the old days, and that's what I was looked upon from the senior management team. And there's been a huge change. And I think particularly now with probably the HSE attack was probably the big one in Ireland. After that, people started to get a bit more serious. It's not just in our security magazines, it's on the front pages of newspapers. So more and more business leaders are becoming aware of that. And again, as what Richard mentioned there, involving them in tabletop exercises. Like, scaring them a little bit and explaining to them in the terms they understand, finance. And a lot of times that's where people think in reputation. So that I think they're definitely, the senior management teams of different organizations are back at the table talking with us now.
Yeah, that makes sense. One question I wanted to ask, moving it on, is, we've touched on AI, and obviously that's the flavor of the month, if you like. Last year, the year before that was blockchain, and now we're on I feel sometimes like people are just crossing it out and kind of going, right, okay, now we're on AI. So to bring some more tech in that isn't here yet, but is on the way, allegedly. Quantum computing, cryptographic security, what sort of impact, if any, do you see these having on cybersecurity?
Look, I've done talk on this actually recently, and I actually had a conversation with somebody earlier on today saying we need to go into quantum computing compliance and all the rest. It is going to be a massive impact if all of a sudden things that we relied on, such as cryptography, necessarily disappeared overnight pretty much, and all that side of things. But I don't think we're quite there yet as that being the pervasive risk in front of us today. I think there's a lot more to deal with, and then everything else that is put in place to deal with that will help. And by that I mean by building out a secure, resilient business and having all of those things, it's easier to identify where the impact of quantum computing, the risks of that, may be facing a particular business. Talking there about communicating with the board, how to get the leadership on board. They need to understand these concepts too, but they just need to understand them. That's all. So gone are the days of walking in with a Qualys report saying we found 50,000 level 5 vulnerabilities and blah, blah, and they go, no, geeks, get out of here. Yeah, it doesn't work.
I don't blame them in that scenario.
Yeah, no, exactly. So the legal requirement is for a DORS document, a Digital Operations Resilience Strategy document, which outlines the business and outlines the ICT risk management approach to that. That's exactly what it is. So now we're all on the same team. And digital resilience is a team sport. Cybersecurity is a team sport. It's the same thing. You're all protecting the same thing, the business. The amount of CISOs I've met, and I'll say to them, so how does this business make money? Oh, it's a bank. Yeah, how does it make money? Right, how does it do it? How does private banking work? How does this, that, the other work? And they have no idea, no idea. But they know about firewalls, they know about EDRs, they know about blah, 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 and all those kind of things. How can you protect something if you don't know what it does? And what are the valuable assets? You don't know what the 5-year plan is for that business. Are they closing down all the retail branches? Are they going digital? What's going on? You have to be aligned. That's why leadership has to be formed. They can't just go, oh, it's down there. Yeah, it's been dealt with.
And likewise, I guess on the tech side, you can't just kind of go, oh, that's something to do with finance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, even in the financial crisis, it was that disconnect having 85-year-old actresses up on the board that didn't know what was going on the ground level, and down the ground level, they're all screaming and going, this thing's mad. We're giving away loans to people with no ability to repay. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So look, it's communication is key here. And that is in everything from even the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's key about communication. The great positive things out of the harmonization of legislation from an EU perspective is that it is harmonized, and it's all the key parts of it are communication, getting the leaders in the business to understand they're protecting the one thing, the business. Michael's point is fantastic around this whole thing of turning it positive and being a differentiator in the market. It couldn't be a stronger point, because that is the difference. If you're going to deal with company A or company B, but you get the feeling and the evidence is there that company A is much stronger, they take this stuff seriously. Nobody's buying on price. you're not going to go with a critical provider because they're $2 cheaper on something or whatever. If you are, you don't deserve to be in the job. You want to go with the right appropriate fit. These are people you're going to be working with for not 1 year and renew a contract, for many years. They're going to become part of your business, an extended part of your business. So that's why even within DORA, there is a legal mandate to train with your key suppliers. So they're part of your organization, to train on incident response, because there's acknowledgement that those key parts are key parts of your business, and why would they respond one way and you respond another, to build up the trust between both organizations as well. So it's all going in the right direction. It's going to be now about, it'll be slow to enforce, but I think once we see leaders in the industry making a difference, and by that I mean the financial sector, I mean critical sector and so on, that would be interesting. It'll be very interesting in Ireland around NIS 2. That I go, yeah. But certainly across Europe, we're seeing it getting very detailed and finite right now. And I'm not Ireland bashing here, I'm just going, there needs to be, more focus around it, and people understanding, what the backbone is of the economy in Ireland, which is small businesses. So, and it's a complex the cybersecurity is not complex. I would totally agree with that. All of this stuff is pretty much. The frustration is that if leaders don't understand the value in what your proposition is, it's called a value proposition for a reason. It's not called, I'll present a Qualys report findings, or whatever, a vulnerability scan report, a net scan, or whatever. That's not what it's called. You're putting a value proposition forward saying, this is the issue, here's my proposed solution, what do we do? Do they want to accept the risk? Great, it's documented, they're accepting the risk. Is that the risk appetite? Or are they going to mitigate it? What's the plan? What's the strategy? That's what it is. Empower the leaders to make a decision. Give them the right kind of information. Because Richard hit upon it there as well. It's about getting the information into them so that they can actually make those decisions. If they're in a vacuum and they just think you're a geek, you're a geek. That's what it is.
Fair enough.
Here's the geek bit, but the quantum computing bit, there's some very good guides from the NCSC in the UK about the roadmap for when the potential implications are for, well, most of the world. So they're saying 2035 is the end deadline for when we will need to have solutions in place. So up until that point, between now and 2028.
Can we just rest and chill out?
No. So that's
Put
where
the
they're
feet
saying
up.
that we'll need to understand, like within a business, about where your encryption is, where your PKI, how you're using it in products, the assessments against those, and then going out to your ICT providers to understand what's their roadmap for the kind of implications to quantum computing against cryptography. So the overall then end goal roadmap is, at least from the UK NCSC guides at the moment, is think about it. You don't have to dwell on it significantly because it's still a theoretical problem. But they're at least proposing that between 2031 and 2035, that there will have to be solutions put in place to protect basically all communications and data at rest.
But just on that, like, 2031 is not far away.
Oh, no.
It might be for me, but it's not so far for some of you. But no, it's not that far away. And I mean, there are some really significant threats out there. There are people out there collecting data at this point, and they're doing a really good job at collecting encrypted data. And they're just minding it, because they know they'll be able to open it at some point in time. So I think it depends where the risk is in the threat. I mean, if you're talking about nation-state stuff and critical national defense stuff, it's one matter. If you're talking about your personal finances in 10 years, it's probably a different matter type of thing. Yeah, your card's expired. Yeah, but it's just. I think it's a key thing to keep on out there in your mind. But I hate when someone says it'll be 2035, because then there's loads of people say, well, on January 2035 we'll look at that. That's a bit away. That won't be me. That'll be somebody else. Because it's not that, and that's tends to be the problem when something, or the issue, I suppose, when something like NIS 2, DOR, or whatever it is, comes along. There's a date. Everybody says, that's the date. We'll start worrying about it very close to that date or a little bit after. The reason people aren't prepared for any of these things is because they didn't prepare in time. And if there wasn't a date there, it'd never happen. I'm looking at all you guys. I'm sure all of you did your homework really early as soon as you got it.
You should have a look.
No.
Hold on.
Well, I don't
Who's
remember
looking
doing
a
it.
bit? Oh, God.
No, you did it on the bus. Well, no, you're all very young. You wouldn't have got buses. You did it when your parents were driving you to school the next day, or whatever. But I'm just saying, and that tends to be the challenge of the industry, or about cyber really so we've got to try to make it more relevant and more appropriate, and more has to be done over time. But things do improve, and for me, the interesting thing when I look at Cyber Expo over the years, the evolution of the technology, the technologies are there to help. They're not there to hinder. A bit like we talked about the ransomware guys, they have make it ransomware easier, make this, and it's trying to make cyber easier, compliance easier, all of those sort of things easier. But that's just me rambling anyway.
Did you want to add something?
No, I don't. Pretty much it's been covered.
Yeah, perfect.
Just really, it's to understand where you have your encryption is the most important thing.
Yeah.
So asset management is where I would say. So we're doing a discovery piece starting now, actually, in cryptography for an organization, and we're looking at data in motion, data at rest, and data in use, and understanding which whether symmetric or asymmetric is going to be affected by quantum. And then the last thing I'd say is just when it comes to NIS2, it is a requirement to have cryptography policies and so forth. So again, it's going back to what we say, know what you're using, and a layered approach as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, it'll be a game changer because we utilize encryption so much. So if it does come to a stage where, and I'm not saying that, by the way, post-quantum either, that's not what's been said, but it's a potential that we have to understand. We're talking about passwords, and passwordless is something that we're coming to in the future as well.
Sure.
So things will change, and we have to adapt to that. We have to be better.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing we haven't talked about is, when we're talking vulnerabilities, is humans in the mix. Those down humans are often the cause and the pain for organizations. Tell us about the vulnerabilities from humans. This is one for you, Michael, I think.
Thanks. Well, it was 74%, Kevin, was it? People blame humans and say that was a stupid thing to do, but let's go back to confidence tricks. People do things because people lure them into a false sense. Like we do phishing testing and all of that type of stuff, and we do that as an organization ourselves. I fell foul, but massively got completely caught out. I was doing something with ROS, I was expecting stuff back, and I got this ROS email, and I clicked on it, and I did all that, and I did it, and it was an internal test, and then I wrote a little short message to our internal guy saying how pleased I was to receive that from him. Thank you very much, you charming chap. Moving on. But the point is that we're all fall foul of it. We'll do something, we'll be under pressure, it'll just hit the right time, the right place. So people's errors and people's mistakes, and they can't necessarily be blamed for them. Really, really can't be blamed for it. But people's errors and mistakes often give rise to vulnerabilities and issues that occur. So what you got to try to do then is say, okay, so if that occurs, there's some other extra layer or level of protection that happens. So some sort of, check, balance, whatever it may be. So changes just can't occur. So people are an issue. And any organization that isn't running regular security awareness training throughout, from bottom to top, and its top are the ones who are going to be targeted. The top are going to be the people who say it'll never happen to them. Yeah, we all know it does. So it's a minimum thing.
But it's, as an interesting example of that, I interviewed Ronan Murphy of Get Visibility just when they had done the sale of the company. I think it was for 70 million. And as I was interviewing him, this was on the sidelines of the Smart Tech conference earlier in the year. He's talking to me, but he's also sort of distracted by his phone. And anyway, we finished up our chat, and then 10 minutes later, he grabs me. He's like, "Jesus, Charlie, I'm not going to try and do the Cork accent," but he was like, "Jesus." He had got an email from his co-founder, and he was like, "WTF, do you know what this is about?" And it was this message that had come apparently allegedly from the buyer saying, "Hold on, the deal's in trouble, whatever, can you send this information?" And I'd gone, "Jesus, quick, Ronan, what do we do here? Or is the deal going to die?" And it was just perfect timing of a threat where someone tried to take them out. And they wised up to it. But, I mean, as Ronan said himself, after that, he's like, we could have got caught just as anyone could get caught. I suppose that just shows...
Ronan wouldn't have paid, don't worry.
Yeah. yeah, that's true, yeah. But just shows the vulnerability of, how everyone could easily make a mistake, right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the key aspects of security awareness training is confidence. So we ask, how confident are you of detecting a phishing email? And we don't want people to be overconfident. We want people to be on edge and suspecting that they are also susceptible to an attack, including ourselves as professionals. And it happens at those moments. You know, it's a busy day. You're suddenly responding to an email very quickly. It's on your phone, harder to detect on your phone, a phishing attempt. So it's getting that message through to people. Is, you know, look, don't be overconfident. Always be, be suspicious, particularly of trusted sources, because more and more common now is where someone is being phished or so forth, and therefore they go for their contacts as well. So it's coming from an email, somebody that you exchange emails on a regular basis, and it's training people like that as well, you know, to constantly test them as well, and across all aspects. So, you know, phishing as well over the voice and so forth, and then physical testing as well is now vitally important. But we're all susceptible to it, and it's getting that message through, and then it's your incident response. Hold your hand up, tell the truth. I made a mistake. Call the people you need to call. Call your incident response team, and that's the message you need to get through. And again, it's working together. You know, security is everybody in the business. It's not just us and them. And you know, we're there to support the operations. Without security, you may not have a job. So that's the way to try and get that through, and really, really get that message through to people.
Yeah, look, I would echo that, but I would add on, this is about loyalty. It's not about compliance training for cybersecurity and teach them not just don't click on links and all that good stuff, that we all try and follow that good stuff. But I often say the answers lie within an organization. I mean that from the point of view that anytime we go to engage with an organization, who has all the knowledge of that organization? It's the people inside it. So whether you're doing an assessment, you're doing whatever, the people that know, love, and care for that organization are inside it. So if you can empower them to do a better job, if you've got 500 staff, that's 500 weak points or 500 people who are looking after and caring for your business and are loyal. And to Kevin's point, they should be encouraged to raise their hand and say something has happened. They should be rewarded for that. That's encouraging loyalty, to say, it's okay, make a mistake. There's only one other crime I can think of where we blame the victim. Sex crime. Well, that's the only other time we blame someone. What were you doing that time of night, walking down that road? What were you expecting? It's terrible we treat people that are victims of crime. And you are a victim of a sophisticated threat actor who have millions and millions and millions of euros and resources to target you. And because you make one simple mistake of clicking on something too quickly or whatever, that what you think you're going to lose your job. The anxiety people go through when this happens. I dealt with a lady a couple of weeks ago. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. She had just done a successful fundraise for the startup she was doing, yada, 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 and they got her, right? And she was broken. She's put years of her life into starting that business. She got my name from someone who gave her another name, blah, blah, blah. And we were able to safeguard that situation. But these people have a real impact on people's lives. They don't care. They don't care, and they destroy someone's life. So whether it's a career thing, and someone could call, I'm going to laugh at me in the canteen because I clicked on something, I'm the one. If you don't report it, you're going to bring down the entire business potentially. But this is where you kind of need to act together. And I make no apologies about bringing in that thing about sex crime, because we need to think about that and think, really, you'd never shame someone if they were a victim of something like that, and they were attacked out in the street or something like that. Never. So why? They're a victim of crime. You know, and sophisticated threat actors, and we need to encourage that loyalty within business. Compliance is a killer. People hate compliance, right? So when they go, oh, we're going for compliance training, oh, right. It can be gamified. It can be made more interesting. But when they know the reason that you're protecting your job, your livelihood, and everything. If your business is doing payroll services, well, then you're keeping all those businesses that you do payrolls for in business. Those people get paid, they get food for their children, everything else. We're all a little cog in society, in a digital society, and that's what we all have a part to play. So we should be very, very aware of that and the part that we're playing. And I hate when I see someone being ridiculed over being stupid. I've fallen for things. You know, everybody can be susceptible to these things. You know, we heard about some of the scams already today in some of the talks, but they're sophisticated, they're effective, and the reason they do them is they work. 1 out of 1 million times is all they have to work. Standard spammer sends out 40 million emails a day, right? That's 40 clicks he gets, or she gets, right? What, $200 a go maybe, $100 a go, 40 times a day, 365 days in a year, that's a lot of cash. You know, they do it because it works. You don't need to be wrong one in a million times. So, you know, it's so important to get your people behind you. You can spend millions on tech, but if your people aren't on board and they just think you're the network Nazis and you're going around telling them not to do this, not to do that, and all that kind of stuff, wow, it's gone. They'll shadow IT before you know it. And that's going to put your whole business in jeopardy. They need to understand why you have policies. Why do you want to do things in this way? And once they understand that, they'll get on board with you.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to touch on, because you're talking about successful cyber attacks there, we've seen a deluge of attacks recently, particularly on well-known businesses, you know, Marks and Spencer's, Co-op and so on. I'm wondering about the impact on them, on, I suppose, awareness of cybersecurity for starters. And then also I'm wondering, in terms of for businesses, are they now in a place where they should expect an attack at some point? I mean, you know, rather than kind of hoping it doesn't happen, should they just assume that they are constantly, you know, potentially under attack?
Yeah, I think if you look at something like M&S and Co-op, I think they will be big headline ones, very much like our HSE, if you like, and they will change a lot of behaviour in terms of people's perceptions of the fact that these things are really out there. But we've absolutely seen in the retail area quite a concern. A lot of organisations in the retail area are saying, listen, do you know what? We need to get our house in order here. We have issues. We have problems. We haven't thought this through. Well, we have thought it through, but we've classically sat there and said, hey, we'll be okay. But they're going, hold on, this is a lot. This is a big business here. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of everything involved. Like there's personally identifiable information involved. There's credit card information involved. There's potentially just extraction of other data and money, if you like, involved. There's the shutting, then there's the whole interruption of the organisation. There's the reputational damage. There's the fines that will come out of the back of that from breaches of various regulations and compliances like the PCI, et cetera, et cetera. So the hits are going to be huge. So I think definitely M&S and Co-op, I think, are really resonating with the retail organisations. Certainly, we've had a lot of conversation with various people who are saying, listen, this is something we need to look at quickly. We've sort of been aware of it. And the problem is, people are aware of things and say, listen, it's like I'm going to get an alarm in because all my neighbours got broken into, but I knew I needed an alarm, whatever. But people just need to start doing the right thing and not continue to do the right thing, continue to upgrade themselves, but definitely it's going to be big change, I'd say.
Richard, any thoughts on that?
I mean, there's probably a mentality of it'll never be me. That probably permeates a lot of companies. Because to be fair, what's happened to those two entities is effectively the same as what's happened to thousands of others before them. Like, it is ransomware as a service. The operators are following a playbook. They have teams. They follow instructions. If it doesn't go their way, they call someone else in their team. They go run through a different playbook, different malware. They know how to get to the top of this. They know where all the weak points are. As security defenders as well on the opposite side, we know how they work. We have IOCs. Again, going back to, I hate this, like with NIS2 and all the rest, like there's going to be a lot more collaboration between information sharing. So the whole cyber threat intelligence piece is going to become a lot bigger probably in the next few years, especially with the CCERTs and the certs across, you know, EU and local. So hopefully there'll be a lot more intelligence sharing about these groups. They're not going to go away because it, again, takes law enforcement quite a long time to actually catch, respond, get evidence, convict them, especially when they're outside of our jurisdiction. So again, like that's going to take a lot of time. But like there's nothing new about what's happening to most of those entities, which is, I suppose, a little bit disappointing. And we've seen it over the years. Like,
I suppose at least a wake-up call, if nothing else, as
and the groups
says.
are going to disappear. The ransomware groups will disappear, but they will be replaced by others like a Hydra. So
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a whack-a-mole job.
Yeah,
Is that right?
This wake-up call is almost a cop-out because, I mean, like, what business mogul that pays a massive salary is sitting on top of a company worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions and doesn't consider ransomware as something that might affect their business? Seriously, like, it's just not acceptable. Not in this day and age. It's not acceptable. This isn't news to these executives that there's a threat vector out there called ransomware that could affect their business and their data. Why are they holding on to data for 7 years and contacting people that bought a shirt 7 years ago and then saying from a CEO saying, sorry, we've had a data breach, your data's gone, blah, blah, blah. It's literally the poster child, a case study for how not to handle an incident. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And it's not acceptable. Right? And I'm not saying that to make an impact. It's just, if that was a fire safety issue, if that was something where the basic, if they had cyber essentials, this wouldn't happen. And believe me, they can afford more than the Cyber Essentials, right? But if they were even just following that, it wouldn't have happened, to the impact that it happened. All leaders of businesses have to expect that these kind of things will happen. It may be threat actors outside of the business, it may be inside the business, it may be weather-related events, it could be global warming-related events, it could be just technology fails or a company goes bust. That's what resilience is about, digital resilience. Understanding all of those kind of things are things that could happen and affect this business. How can they just all of a sudden go, oh, I didn't know ransomware is going to hit, could do this to us? Seriously, it's not acceptable. And look at O2 before that, right? That was a teenager up in Northern Ireland that wiped 1 billion, right? Any lessons learned there? This is kids again taking down these massive organizations. What happens when the GRU or Mr. Putin wants to come after your business? If you can't defend against kids who are renting software off the GRU, who are renting software off the GRU, so how are you going to defend against those kind of adversaries or whatever? This is about resilience. It is about being able to not just be in business continuity mode, not just disaster recovery mode, but actually just be able to have those things of resilience. Quantum computing, you're building resilience if you are following NIS2 and if you're following DOORS and you're putting in all those things. You're building towards those other future theoretical threats that may be there for us as well.
But it is a good example of retail is an interesting example because retail,
small margins.
They tend not to spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
So they manage things tight. And because we don't have DORA, we don't have NIS2 saying, listen, you must do something, so it doesn't get done. So it's a real good example of what happens if you don't regulate, you don't try. But the impact on these guys is not going to be it's going to be commercial impact. And this is what I'm saying to you. They're in third-party risk management and everything. It is going to be a commercial impact. So the penalty these guys will suffer will be a commercial penalty rather than a legislative penalty, but they will suffer some regulatory penalties, PCI, et cetera, et cetera. There will be impacts on those guys, but it's...
But they'll absorb them, Michael. I've dealt with retailers as well, and they've often said straight up, what's the fine? Yeah, it's less expensive than the cure. So.
But, negligence is the word that's
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering about on the negligence side,
Yeah.
even the reputational damage. I mean,
We need to see
will it
cases
impact
like that.
people
We
that
need
we
to
kind of
see
go,
cases like that,
do I
yeah.
trust Marks and Spencers
Yeah, yeah.
anymore?
Definitely, we could see that. Yeah. I suppose just what we would always say when I engage with an organization, it's not if, it's when you're going to be hit by a cyber attack, and it's how you react to it. So it's that incident response, and a lot of people, well, a lot of maybe industries and so forth, they feel, well, if I purchase high tech, technologies and so forth, I'm paying $500,000 for this, so therefore everything's going to be okay. But it's having the boots on the ground as well, and back to the training as well. But reputation, definitely. I mean, if we look even at the Ulster Bank and so forth, when they had those outages and so forth, and obviously, where's Ulster Bank at the moment? So it's going to affect the retail industry. But I agree, if without regulations, it can be difficult. And again, it's seen as an overhead, like IT is in a lot of cases for businesses. But I suppose with digital business now and e-commerce and so forth, that's where there's more adoption of that for, let's say, the retail industry. But the cyber side of it is still, they're going, well, this is costing me a lot of money, and why do I need to invest there?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just aware of time there, so I was wondering, any questions from the audience? Come on, don't be shy.
One here on the left.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. There's a mic there.
Great panel discussion. Two things. Just in terms of getting caught, when Troy Hunt was caught from having been pawned, if he can get caught, I think anybody can get caught. That's that I had that thought last month. But just in terms of from a local perspective in Ireland, could you give me some insights on enforcement and prosecution, and the reality of that is like we're really bad at that in this country. Is that something that people are really going to fear?
So within Ireland, there's definitely, well, I've been involved in some where there's been obviously crime committed within Ireland. The problem with the Garda Síochána is that realistically, to convict some of the people, they're going to be operating with like Interpol or Europol. So realistically, they'd have to be extradited to Ireland for prosecution of a crime. So there's a lot of challenges in Well, first of all, the sharing element of crimes being committed within Ireland across, say, like the EU and worldwide, and then also getting them convicted and extradited to Ireland. So I don't think there's been any easy answers in that, and that's kind of maybe one of the downfalls.
And I was really thinking of the executives from the board level.
Yeah.
You know, are they really going to be worried? Are they really going to be, is there going to be enforcement and prosecution?
Yeah, could I take that actually? Like, I think, first of all, I always take an opportunity to commend the Garda Síochána because I think that they perform well out of their weight division based on the resources they have. They play in an international field. They are so effective on what they're doing on a cooperation basis, and lots of local stuff as well. But we park that for a moment because lots of naysay about, you know, their own experiences on a day-to-day, maybe on something like that. Here's the thing. We need to see a perp walk from someone in a bank who, from a duty care perspective, has really let something down. Now, the legislation is now there, right, that you can literally do that. And that is what they're going to need to do and follow through. An 80 grand fine, as Michael says, yeah, whatever. But a hidden individual who went from the top of his career as a CIO in a bank in London, he is now changing printer toners or whatever down in South America, right? And he's to pay £81,000 person himself because of PRA fine, whatever. But that was kind of, you know, the starting point in all of this, because now everybody's realizing, oh, I'm liable for this because I meant to be an expert in this field, and I said this, and I said that, whatever. But the ultimate culpability, until we see leaders really, really, really take this, you know, and it will have to be hit them in the pocket or worse, you know. And look, DORA has it within the legislation to do it as well. I think you probably see it from a NIS2 perspective, probably on an operational level first. You'll see people who were calling themselves cybersecurity experts or whatever are getting cut out pretty quickly. Because of the credentials, experience, and abilities aren't there, that we found out pretty sharpish post-incident. It's not going to get caught in proactive audits and assessments whether you NIS2 compliant. But when the world changes, when shit hits the fan. That's all I can say. Because once that happens, you can talk to businesses all day long, but when that happens, and the scrutiny and the lens of what happened pre-boom, as we were talking about earlier on, and all that kind of stuff, pre-something happening, you go in forensically and get independent oversight on what happened, you go, wow, really? You're running the place like this? That's insane. You know, no visibility of where's your latest network map? Where's all the assets behind that app? Tell me where they are. What country are they in? Who has access to those assets? What's your encryption levels on them? Where's your policy on that? Where are they stored? Everything else. You can just tear people apart. That's why I mean, like, compliance is actually kind of a low-level baseline. And people think getting away with it, got away with that audit, got away with that assessment, whatever. But when you're in trouble, when you're in the crosshairs, and someone at my level or better is coming in to tear you apart, you're done, you're goosed. Unless you have all of the right things in place. Because all of that stuff will be found. You know, and somebody has to be responsible at the end of the day. Kevin mentioned earlier on about qualitative risk. The fines doesn't come out of their pocket, so a lot of them, they just go, oh yeah, look, the fines are the fines. But the brand reputation and everything else like that. Like if you were Brenda McDonough in Nama now, I'm not sure your brand is too good for heading up a housing thing when it's just come out that you're Airbnb-ing a house at 10 grand a week. Brand damage is brand damage on a personal level or a commercial entity basis, you know, at the end of the day. And it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and moments to lose it. That's personally and professionally for businesses and everything else as well. Instant. You could be so many years building something up. Ratner's is the great example. Everybody really wants to start looking into stuff like that. Ratner's is the ideal example. Yeah. There you go.
Great question. Thanks for that. Anyone else? I'll give you my mic. Go on.
My question was towards Paul.
Sure.
I noticed that you mentioned about the children being used, this kind of ransomwares of like renting them from people that actually do this. But my question is that, what do you think in a couple of years from now, like what kind of improvements could that be made so that these kind of children would not be like exposed to these kind of things, like probably through schools, through law enforcement, especially here in Ireland or in UK or around the world? So what would be
Okay, it's a great question, but let me give you two answers, right? First of all, these kids are smart, savvy kids. They're not naive children that are involved in this particular thing. However, the United Nations has done a study for a number of years who identified that most of the kids who are brought into the cyber criminal community have issues around, well, I say issues, that they'd have Asperger's, they may be trans, they're in smaller kind of community cliques who are easier to pick off and identify and bring them in and use their fantastic brains for Mr. and Mrs. Evil, who's coordinating this kind of activity. And we saw this with things like the O2 attack and all that. So unfortunately, law enforcement captured those people because they're easier to catch and they're low-level kind of troops at the end of the day, but don't capture the other ones. So we need to identify those really clever, smart people. By the way, there's a country called Israel who have a unit 8200 who identified these children aged 10, 11 years of age, and they groom them to bring them into the army. They conscript them, then they use them to have power in the cyber world against other entities around the world. I won't go too further than that because I want to get home in one piece. But that's literally what happens. So we need to identify, I mean, the whole education system needs to be revised anyway, but there's brilliant minds, brilliant kids, everything else like that, need to be identified and explained to that. And also, finally, I did a lot of work with the NCA, and I'd say this in the UK. There is a rule that if you find young kids walking around with a knife, that you stop them and explain to them how that knife can affect their life. They might get stabbed with it, they might get killed with it, whatever. What's the difference when they download malware or they download these tools or they learn the exciting world of hacking? I was a hacker, right? You know, and I loved being able to take things apart and put them back together. Some kids are just like that. So we need to identify them and go, aha, you know what you're brilliant at? You know, let's bring it to this world. I don't mean everyone becomes a pen tester, but those brilliant minds in quantum computing, in cryptography, in AI, and all of those, and bring them to the world of good, to the bright side as opposed to the dark side. The dark side is always looking for guys like that, always looking to harvest children and use them. They're easy pawns, use their bank accounts, use their identities, use them, get them to carry out the dirty work, and let them get caught. And it's a good report. I haven't read it probably in about 4 years, but it was an annual report that was coming out. They wrote a book as well about that, and I always found that fascinating that it was that cross-section of people that were being identified and being used by the underground economy, in effect. And that's when, you know, things were starting off at the Carter Planet, things were starting off in Odessa and places like that. That's where they were building up their workforce from. They're saying, oh, these clever patsies we can take and we can use. So, but this, what we're seeing with Marks and Spencer's, more sophisticated, more savvy. These guys are more Andrew Tate than anything else. Okay. This is what would be called. They'd refer to themselves as Sigma. If anybody knows what that means.
I was just going to say on that one, like, when you are that young, it's obviously there's a prestige involved in the whole thing, and a thrill. So like one of the popular groups is like the Calm or Scattered Spider, and they've been quite prolific in the last couple of years. And they're very smart, the people who are getting arrested, but they are teenagers. They're like 15 to like 19, 21 even. And 21's quite young. So again, like, but again, like, they're only starting out their lives, and they've potentially already just ruined it with a criminal record. So I mean, like, there's other kind of that whole point of you want to lead them onto something better. Like, there's bug bounties and stuff. They can make money out of hacking for free. Like, so you'd hopefully want to lead them into realizing there's a better way of doing things, and that's probably one. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, and they get praise in their persona. They create fake personas, and that persona, their life online, they're not meek and mild and being bullied in a playground or something like that. They're heroes. They're getting lots of praise, everything else like that, and they're grooming them. They're using the same techniques that predators and pedophiles use to groom them. They're giving them praise. They're giving them rewards. All these kind of things as well, and they bring them along on that basis. But they're the skills you want. And until you get people with purple mohawks on a board, you're not going to have the right kind of level. And that's to use a John McAfee phrase, because you need people that actually know this stuff backwards to be able to fundamentally advise organizations where the stuff is. It can't be stuffy old white guys in suits and all that kind of stuff giving all the advice. It's diversity is where all these answers are as well. I said that on purpose, by the way.
We know. Come here, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks ever so much for sitting in and paying attention and for your great questions. And thanks ever so much for the panelists, Michael, Richard, Kevin, and Paul. Thanks again. Cheers. Bye.